Hey y'all, sorry if you were having issues getting into, I don't know, all the things today. TST's been having some intermittent issues. Looks like it's a piece of hardware that needs to be replaced. So, hey, things to look forward to in your career. Yeah, site-wide outages. Always fun. Well, anyway, as you may notice if you look up in the top right-hand corner of the video, this is a little later than normal, and yeah, that's because I wasn't able to get into Moodle either for quite a while to show you guys what I needed to show you. So anyway, quick video to kind of go through what you're kind of expected to do this week. So this week is all about using vSphere, or ESXi as it's properly named. So here's the deal with these particular things. So far, you've been using something called VMware Workstation or VMware Workstation Player. Either of those, I mean, those are your Type 2 hypervisors. So there are quite a few hypervisors out there. VMware and VirtualBox are probably the ones that you may be most familiar with. And those are Type 2. Basically, what that means is that they run on top of an existing operating system. So you're running Mac OS, or you're running Windows, or you're running some distribution of Linux, and then on top of that you install VirtualBox or VMware, and you're able to create and use virtual machines. Well, there's another type. Type 1. And Type 1 hypervisors are they do the same job, right? The entire point is that they run VMs, but Type 1 hypervisors run a little bit differently in that they don't have a base operating system to run off of. VMware vSphere is probably one of the best examples of a Type 1 hypervisor that you can really get. When you install VMware, you're not installing it on top of Windows. You are, just like Windows, you're installing it like Windows. You're giving it an entire disk. You're kind of running through the whole gambit of, hey, this is going to wipe out all of your disk. You're going to install this operating system. When you turn on your computer after installing vSphere, you boot up to vSphere. And as a matter of fact, you don't actually get to do anything in the vSphere interface that you boot up to. So if you plug in a monitor to the vSphere computer, the server that's running vSphere, you get a text-based user interface. Tells you the IP address that you can log into. Tells you, really, that's pretty much it. It's like, hey, go here to administer this thing, and you do it all through a web interface. Now, there are Type 1 hypervisors that don't behave like that actually behave a lot more like how VMware behaves. Hyper-V is a good example of this. If you've already used Hyper-V in the past, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But if you've never used it before, Hyper-V, it behaves like VMware Workstation. It really does. You open up the Hyper-V manager, you can create new VMs like that through the interface, and assign it your disks and all that stuff, right? But turns out Hyper-V is truly a Type 1 hypervisor, and there's magic going on behind the scenes that you don't see that allows it to behave like a Type 2 hypervisor and have the convenience of a Type 2 hypervisor, right? That, it's not everything. It's not your entire OS. It's just a part of your OS, but it gets the performance benefits of a Type 1 hypervisor. The reason that I think a lot of the market has moved over to vSphere is, they did it first. They were one of the first best VMware hypervisors out there. But that's all it does. There's nothing else that that vSphere does other than run VMs. So it's really good at what it does, and there's no ambiguity there. But with Hyper-V, again, you get that performance benefit, but it behaves like a Type 2 hypervisor. So the magic, one of the coolest things about Hyper-V is that when you're running Hyper-V, it doesn't look like your desktop is any different. But it turns out the magic underneath, the magic of Hyper-V, is that your desktop is actually a VM too. That's what really makes Hyper-V interesting, more interesting, I think, than vSphere, is that you get to run your desktop the same way that you always do. You get to play your games, you get to, open up Google Chrome, all that stuff, and you're none the wiser. You don't notice, but that's a VM. So it's got some really cool, interesting things like hardware pass-through, which is why it doesn't feel like a VM. It's got native access to your video card, and it's got native access to your CPU. So it's not bound like a regular VM would be bound. But, you don't see it, but it's a VM, and it's just really, it's just an interesting way to think about how hypervisors behave. And, a Hyper-V does not, at least on the surface, meet the definition of Type 1 hypervisor, which is, the OS is the hypervisor, whereas Type 2, the OS is part of the entire system and the hypervisor is secondary. Hyper-V kind of skirts that line. It is a Type 1 underneath, but it behaves like a Type 2, which makes it kind of confusing. Anyway, you'll play with Hyper-V later on, so you'll really get to see what I'm talking about if you haven't already played with Hyper-V up to this point. So anyway, in this week, we're going to be focusing on vSphere. This right here is a link to kind of the page where it tells you about ESXi or vSphere. Don't worry about any of the links on this. This is really just a overview of what the heck vSphere actually is. So just take a quick peek at it. You can look at the spotlight, just take a basic look at it. There's not a whole lot here that you need to worry yourself about. But, it's good to know where to go to get it if you need it. And turns out if you actually need vSphere, you're not going to get 6 at all. You're going to get 7. I think if you try to start the trial, it bumps you over to 7 anyway. So, anyhow, so take a quick peek at this link. Don't download anything on it. That's not the point. The vSphere download that you need, you already downloaded in that batch of stuff that you got from Unit 1. If for some reason you've deleted it or you didn't get it or something like that, make sure to go back to Unit 1 in the lab to find the link to go get all that stuff again. So make sure you're getting the vSphere download so that you can do this lab. So anyway, the quiz is based off of this, the installation and setup guide. And this is another one of those where it's like a gajillion pages. So Command F on Mac, Control F on Windows, that's going to be your friend. That will help you find all the answers to all of the things. And I think that's pretty much how everybody does it. In the real world, Control F solves all the problems. Anyway, so the Unit 3 lab goes over quite a few things. There is a video, that pretty much walks you through Activity 1 and Activity 2, and I'm going to show you a little bit about Activity 3. I think it's 3. We'll see. Anyway, so here's the deal. On Activity 1, you're really just going to install it. Again, make sure you get that ISO from the ITW 1313 Google Drive link, not from this link here. That will take you to 7. There's really not a whole lot of difference, and what I'm going to show you in a little bit is going to be 7 anyway, but once you start looking at it, it looks almost identical. So honestly, if you did go get 7, probably wouldn't notice the difference. Anyway, you're just going to do an install. The install is super duper simple. In VMware Workstation, you'll create a new VM just like you did with Windows. You want to give it as much RAM as you possibly can. Give it as many cores as you possibly can. But I understand not everybody has the same exact laptop or same exact desktop, so some people can give 8 gigs of RAM. Some people can only give 4, or, if you're really strapped for it, 2. Some people only have dual-core processors, so you can only give 2 total. To something like that. But the more, the better. One thing you don't want to skimp on is this right here. There is a threshold, and I think it's about 100 gigs, where vSphere allows you to use one disk. Most vSphere deployments will use a single disk for the operating system itself. A lot of times that's a flash drive that you install internally to a server. right? I know there are external USBs, but a lot of times those USBs, so they don't ever accidentally get unplugged, are installed internally to the server. There's a little, basically like a dongle that you have on the inside. That's where you'll plug your flash drive into. That's where you'll actually install vSphere on most deployments. In this deployment, however, we're all going to do it in one big old disk. So don't worry too much about this. If you're looking at your disk and you're like, oh, God, I don't have 150 gigs to spare, don't worry. You will probably need about 40, 50 gigs because the whole point of this is once we get it installed, we're going to create a VM inside ESXi or vSphere to install Windows on. So, yeah, we'll need some space for that. If you are super stretched, what I would say is you can likely delete your Windows server at this point. But before you delete the server, note where during the installation right here, and you can go into the settings of your VM to find where your storage is stored. But while you're creating this virtual hard disk, it tells you where it's going to save it. So what you can do is either in the vSphere, the VMware Workstation interface, you can do an export, so you have yourself like an OVA where you can back that up, put it on an external hard drive or something like that, save some space. Or you can quite literally just rip out the VMDK files that are stored that make up this virtual hard disk. So one way or the other, you can back it up. Most of the work that we're going to be doing after this particular week is going to be on a Hyper-V deployment that we store at TSTC Waco. So most of your work is going to be done not on your own laptop. You'll just be using your laptop as a window in, or your desktop as a window in to the Hyper-V deployment that we've got at on the campus. So won't be the end of the world if you delete your Windows server, but it would be a good idea to back it up. Anyhow, so 150 gigs, we're not going to use all of that. We'll probably use about 50 gigs of that, so do have some free space available for the rest of this lab. Like I said, the installer is super easy. Once you boot up into it, it's quite literally just this kind of menu. It'll take a little while. Give this about 5 to 10 minutes to load up, depending on whether you're on an SSD. That will be faster than in a hard disk, the spinning style hard disk. It'll go on through. It will ask, are you sure you want to do this? Of course, you want to accept the agreement. You will only have one disk, so it'll look very similar to this right here, and you'll see capacity. As whatever you set it to. You probably get away with 100, but just stick with the numbers here. Since it's lazily created, it's not going to use 150 gigs. It'll just use whatever you use. So as you go through the install, it's going to ask for a root password. It might let you know, it will likely let you know that your CPU is so old it will likely not be supported in the later versions of vSphere, but it's okay. Don't worry about that. You can ignore that and move on. Everything else is pretty standard. Just walk on through it. Once it reboots, this is what I was talking about. When you plug a monitor into your vSphere server, this is what you see. You don't get to do much. You can set an IP address by hitting F2 and changing some settings, but you really can't do the bulk of anything there. Everything else is pretty much done within the web interface. So this is really where that comes in handy. So by default, VMware Workstation Pro and VMware Workstation Player all connect up your VMs to a network, 192.168.245. That's likely the default. If you haven't changed anything, it's likely what you're getting. And then you can use the IP address that it shows up right there in a browser on your actual laptop, not in the VM or anything like that. On your actual laptop, you can use a browser to get to the IP address there. So you just type in the IP address in the title bar or in the search bar up here, and it'll take you straight there. Do note though that you'll probably get a "this is not secure" error. I think there's that is in Internet Explorer. I doubt anybody actually has Internet Explorer anymore. I think everybody's been forced to move up to Edge. Browsers seem to be a lot less of an issue anymore. So it says here, open Internet Explorer. And any browser will be fine. And it does note Chrome and Firefox will work. Don't worry too much about it. But they do look different. So I've got not a Hyper-V, an ESXi server running here locally that I can log into. So this is what Chrome will look like, and you'll do advanced and proceed. I tend to use Firefox to do anything with this particular server, and this is what Firefox will look like if that's what you're using. Then hit advanced and accept the risk. And as you can see, this is pretty much what it looks like, right? This is 7.0, and this is 6.5. So yeah, there's really not a whole lot of difference between the two. You'll log in as root, and whatever you set